Hello and welcome to the Car Care channel and welcome to this CT200. So this is basically a third generation Prius, same engine, same everything underneath, a little bit different in the back. But today this car is in the shop for a blown head gasket. And this is something common with this and third generation Prius, but we're gonna go a little bit further than the head gasket. We're gonna explain what happened and why we are almost gonna replace the whole engine. Let's get started and we'll talk about it along the way.
Let's grab your favorite beverage and your favorite snack and let's talk about this car. So this is a 2011 Lexus CT200h. This model ran from 2011 all the way to 2017 in the US. Other markets they actually went all the way to 22. This is heavily based off of the third generation Prius, which that one is from 2010 all the way to 2015. The CT200 was like the nicer version of the third generation Prius, had different rear suspension, and it was just overall a normal car. It didn't have the interesting shape of the third generation Prius. But this one initially came to our shop for a diagnosis on December 8th, and the initial concern was a check engine light and some rough running in the morning. And this is something that I want to explain to you about the third generation Prius and the CT200 because they have the exact same engines, exact same powertrain. So there are multiple causes for rough running in the morning only, and then it clears up for these engines or this powertrain. So the first one is simple. EGR valve gets carboned up, gets blocked, and it gets stuck open. And when you're at lower speeds for the engine, it'll start misfiring. And the typical thing with hybrids, and it's not just this one, all Toyota hybrids, when they misfire, it creates this heavy rattling. It sounds like a rod knock. People really freak out from it if you haven't heard it before. That's actually the planetary gear set rattling inside the transmission because the engine is not running smooth. So this car came in for that. We checked the EGR at the time. I told the customer, look, we might have an EGR issue here, but we got to really dig into it because they initially just asked, like, what do you think? We've serviced this car before. What do you think it could be? What are we looking at? I told them we really have to look into it. Could be multiple things. But here's how this could progress to go really south. It could be just an EGR, replace the valve, clean the pipe, sometimes replace the intake manifold because it gets plugged up and really hard to clean well. Or it could be the beginning of a very notorious problem with this engine for a specific reason, and we're going to talk about it as we go in this video. Now, here's what really went south with this one. EGR was questionable. It was a little bit carboned up. Intake was really carboned up. So I told him, we definitely have an EGR problem. But here's the way to test these to know if you have a head gasket or an EGR. EGR, you can easily look at it. I actually have a video. I'll leave it in the linked in the description here. But the other way is you pressurize the cooling system and then you take the spark plugs, you look inside each cylinder right where the head gasket is. These actually leak enough coolant into the cylinder where you will see the droplets coming down. That's how much these leak. So when you start it in the morning, you shut it off, the system was pressurized, it'll start oozing coolant inside the cylinder. When you come to start it in the morning, you have some coolant sitting in the cylinder. It's going to run horrible until it burns off that coolant. Then it's running fine. But the problem is, how do you know if you have an EGR problem or a coolant leak problem from the head gasket? You got to check both. And the biggest mistake I see is people assuming it's the one or the other. You can't assume. You have to look. And it's something relatively DIY to check, actually. You just remove the pipe, check the EGR, and then not if you assume that it's just the EGR. If you see it clogged up, you have to actually look at the head gasket as well because it could be either or actually sometimes both. But here's the problem with this one. Another common problems, and this video is going to make this engine sound like a horrible one. And honestly, they had a lot of issues with this engine. They were remedied later, but a little too late, in my opinion. This engine also loves to burn oil. And sometimes that oil burning is caused by so much coolant on the cylinder walls over and over and over. Because when these start leaking coolant, into the cylinder. It's small amounts. Most people don't even notice, especially if you remote start it. You won't hear it rattling in the morning, then it's smoothed out. Because when it's smoothed out, it's perfectly fine until the head gasket gets big enough. Usually with these they start leaking between cylinders. That's when they get excessive, or it starts leaking so much coolant into the cylinder that you have misfires and it just never runs right anymore. So here's what happened with this particular one. Comes into the shop, we check the EGR. EGR is no good. I pressurize the cooling system. We have a small leak from the head gasket. But then, while I was looking inside the cylinder, I look at the walls. I usually, when you check engines, you got to check everything. We can't just half check it. You got to give the owner the full picture from A to Z, basically, so they can make the right decision here. I told the owner, look, does this car burn oil? They were like, well, it does a little bit. I'm like, okay, because what I'm looking at inside the engine suggests it doesn't burn a little bit. It burns a lot. He says, yeah, it burns a lot. Some people don't want to admit that. They love their cars, and that's fine. I understand that. But this engine has severe cylinder wall damage. I mean, something unreal. Basically, I estimate this engine, and I never got the final number from the customer, but I estimate this engine burns anywhere from 2 to 3 quarts every 1,000 miles, which is excessive. Anything over a quart, 1,000 miles, that is getting into the excessive range. But here's how this went downhill. I told the customer, look, I am not going to tear into this engine halfway, change the head gasket, and then leave everything else, because that would be, in my book, robbing you, because this engine still burns oil, and at any point it's going to start clogging catalytic converter, carboning up valves, and then it gets to a point where it starts misfiring again because now it has no compression because the cylinder wall is completely worn down. And any mechanic that does that, I think they didn't do their job. You have to give the customer the full picture. If they decide to do half a repair, that's on them, but you have to inform them of everything. So here's what I told this customer. Look, this car has right around 200,000 miles at that time of the inspection in December. You're going to need to do something about the oil burning in addition to the head gasket and the EGR system. The EGR system gets taken out even if we just do the head gasket. So I gave them a few options, like, you want to fix this right, put a short block, fix the head gasket, take care of the EGR issue, and then you won't have any issues with this car for a very long time, because now you basically have almost a new engine. Or if you just want to get by for a year or so, up to a year, you can just fix the head gasket, but we're not talking about a couple $100 here. It's still a big repair that costs thousands. So the third option, just clear the EGR up, clean it up, just to get you by for a month or two, but it's still going to run horrible because we have the head gasket leak. This customer initially said, well, I will see how much I can stretch this out in his current situation. He's an Uber driver, and I understand commercial drivers are different than, personal cars. They have to, every penny counts, and I understand that. This is a commercial car. This is not a car, to commute and go back to work. So the car left. I never heard anything. I gave him all the estimates, everything, and that was that. I wished him the best, and I truly hoped this car would last a little longer. But then, a few months later, April, we get a call in the shop. Car doesn't run anymore because it just keeps misfiring. It's severe, to a point where he's no longer driving the car. As an Uber driver, I suppose he rented a car through Uber. I don't know how that works, but that's what I heard from him. And he wanted to do the whole job. He wanted to, basically, he was completely committed. I did warn him about one thing. Now that we have gotten to this extreme point, and this is, I guess, is the point of advice, don't let it get to this point. Either do something about it in the moment, or be very watchful, because when things progress, you could cause more damage. If you let this car overheat, it's actually going to warp the cylinder head. And that's my biggest concern with this job as we were taking it apart. We're about to pull the engine out here. My biggest concern is this car mixed oil and coolant, meaning the head gasket leak got so big, and it's really unknown if this car overheated. This car has been sitting for a few months. We didn't get to it appointment-wise until June. So we're pulling this engine out, and I'm hoping. I quoted him short block. I quoted him some EGR components, And later I decided on the water pump. I'll tell you about that, how that decision came about. But I am not sure about the cylinder head. Is it warped? There's no way for you to know until you tear it apart. And that's going to add multi-$1,000s to this job. I don't like to surface cylinder heads because aluminum engine, I've been burned by this before, not a great idea for longevity. If you do that, there's all kinds of experimenting with a thicker head gasket. I don't do that. We're either going to fix it 100% or we're going to fix it at 0%, hand you the keys, and have a nice day, because the expenses here are very high. Let's talk about this engine a little bit, because we were just about to put it on the engine stand, because things went a little different in the removal process. So let's go back to the live video. We'll talk about this, and then we'll get back to our conversation.
So here's the engine. We got it out. This took a little bit longer because we basically took all the accessories in the car, even the wire harness, and we just got the long block bare. So let's take a look at this engine, because it's a very interesting engine. If you notice here, they actually, even though this is a hybrid, they have a place for a starter, but it's just covered up with a plate, and that's about it. There is a lot of gunk and stuff inside the intake. That's all gonna get cleaned up if we end up not replacing the cylinder head. Let's hope that is the case, because if you noticed when we drained the oil, there was an alarming amount of coolant in the oil. So we'll see if that works. We'll see how that works, but we do have a front timing cover leak. That's also gonna get taken care of. This engine is pretty simple to work on. It's, there's not much to it, but let's look here, because I wanna show you something about the hybrid system. This is a hybrid transmission. If you've never seen it before, it literally has a little stub right here, just like a manual transmission, and it really splines into it, and that's about it. It's pretty cool. And they do have, it's not really a clutch. Many people have, when we talk about hybrids not having a clutch in their transmission, people say, no, there is a clutch in between. It's not really a clutch, it's a damper. Let's go look at it, so you guys can see exactly what's going on here. So, for lack of a better term, this is the flywheel, which is basically just a chunk of metal. There's not really much to it. And a very interesting 14mm 12-point bolts. Usually Toyota uses just regular 14s. These are 12-point. And this is what people refer to as the clutch. It's actually not a clutch, it's a damper. All this does, transmission is here, and there's these springs that kind of dampen the movements of the engine. See, gasoline engines, when they start, they create a little bit of vibration when they start, so this dampens that so it wouldn't break the transmission or the MG1, which is what's directly connected here. Pretty cool. But in order to do this job, I went the long, easy route. I pulled the wiring harness out, I pulled the inverter, and here's that inverter. In case you haven't seen an inverter of this is the same thing as third generation Prius. This is the inverter. Just very simple. This comes off, few cables. Of course, we did disconnect the high voltage battery from the back, the service connect, and everything is looking good. So here is the plan. What we're gonna do here is we're gonna disassemble this engine. We're gonna see where we're at. I'm really worried about that cylinder head because we did mix oil and coolant. That does happen, but do we have a warped head? And that's really the biggest concern here. If we don't, we're good. If we do, we're gonna stop and revisit our options. So I'm gonna put you guys back on the time lapse. We're gonna tear this thing apart completely. Then we'll show you what happened to the cylinder head, why this engine is burning oil. As we talked about, this is why this whole thing went this route, and we'll continue from there.
So at this point, my blood pressure is continuously rising. I don't like to give inaccurate estimates. I like to be as accurate as possible. When we're going into the unknown, you just don't know. And you try to prepare them, basically prepare for the worst, hope for the best, if you would. But I don't like situations like that. I like to be accurate where we exactly know what's going on. But unfortunately, in this case, it's not possible. But let me tell you about why things kind of changed. And one note, the owner of this car, nicest guy in the world, God bless him, because he's a very nice guy and very understanding. So this car got towed in. I haven't seen this car since we did our initial diagnosis. We drove in, it was running fine, just misfiring in the morning. Got towed in, has been sitting for months, and battery is dead, 12-volt battery is dead. Engine does not crank. It was hydrolocked, basically. So in order for us just to be able to move it around to maybe see if we have more damage, We had to take the spark plugs in the parking lot. That was my least favorite thing, is to work outside in the parking lot, but we have no choice. Take the spark plugs out, crank the engine with MG1, which now the hybrid battery is really weak, and get some of that coolant out, put the spark plugs back, start the car, and basically cloud our entire neighborhood with all the white smoke from the coolant. Car ran, and this is the best part. When owners see their car they haven't ran for a while, all of a sudden run, because after a while it cleared up, it was running okay, not the greatest, but it was running, and I drove it around just to charge the hybrid battery, because that's another whole different problem we did not want to get into. The hybrid battery was critically weak and low on charge, and you do not want to run a hybrid battery super low on charge. So we got that taken care of, and that was the moment where the owner was like, wait, it's running, it's fine, is it okay? No, it was not okay. As you see in this exact shot, there is a lot of coolant in the oil. I mean, this was really turning out to be, I'm like, this has progressed a lot than when we last saw it, and I was really concerned, and I shared those concerns with him, but we're about to find out. The moment of truth is coming. The engine is completely torn apart. Let's go back to the live video, find out, is our cylinder head good or not?
So we got the engine all torn apart. First, let's talk about the block, and then we're going to talk about the cylinder head. This block is getting replaced, as we talked about, because of oil consumption. If you come around this way and we look inside, look at this huge wear mark right there. That is just unbelievable. And look at this one. This one is even worse. I mean, the cylinder is literally completely worn down over there. And this is what's common with these. This is super common with this engine. Up to 2014 is when they updated the piston and piston rings. If you have oil consumption with this or the third generation Prius, basically they're exactly the same engine. If you don't have these wear marks on the cylinder walls, you can actually just replace the pistons and update the piston rings. Both of them are updated and you should be good. That's from experience rare. Usually they do have cylinder wall damage and whatnot. So hence why we're replacing this entire short block. And we'll look at that in a bit. But our main concern here is the cylinder head. Now this cylinder head, we had a little bit of time constraints at the shop. We've already serviced this, we've already done with this. But let me show you what our concern was with this cylinder head. Basically, when you have head gasket issue, there's one thing you have to check, which is the straightness of, if this is warped or not, how straight is the surface. So the spec is for warpage on this one is 20 thousandths of an inch. This feeler gauge actually 15 thousandths. It's going to be very hard to show you, but this is 15 thousandths. So this is actually, we're taking it even to the next level. I put our straight edge. That's not going. That's not going. That's good. Let's try it here. That's good. Let's try it over here. Straight is really hard to get to sit right. You have to let it sit flat. I think we are good on this cylinder head. So here's what actually happened with this head gasket. Do you see this area right here? This is what actually caused the leak. This is the coolant passage, and this is the cylinder. And you see it just started crossing. This is a common problem with this engine, and it actually got revised again around 2014. They basically changed the design of the head gasket itself to make it stronger in this area, and it resolved this issue. Unless you severely overheat this engine, there has not been kind of evidence of it developing warpage, and now you have to do something with the cylinder head or replace it. So we're good there. I was a little concerned about it. So we serviced this, lapped all the valves. We got new valve guide seals, cleaned it up a little bit. You remember the intake was all really badly gummed up. Now it's cleaner, so that's taken care of. And we cleaned it up because the other problem with this engine is it mixed a little bit of coolant and oil. And I believe it didn't mix it in large amounts. It was just a small amount. So we also took the oil pump apart, cleaned it up, checked everything, because coolant, when it gets in oil, really starts destroying things. So this actually checked out all good. We're gonna end up reusing this. We still got lots of cleaning to do before we start reassembly. But let me show you some of the new parts that we got here, because in addition to the short block, which actually we haven't even opened yet, let's open it, check it out. Here is this beautiful, beautiful short block. Here's that short block. It's actually a very, very small block, and that's it's very light to carry. It's not really heavy at all. Pretty cool. This is a brand new Toyota one. Toyota, by the way, does not sell long blocks. That's a lot of you have asked in the comments on previous engine builds. They don't sell a long block. So basically, a short block is the cylinder block with everything in it, pre-assembled. Long block will include all the, like the cylinder head, the valves, the chain, everything, just not accessories and stuff bolted on the outside. So they do not sell that. In addition to this, we're actually replacing the cooler for the EGR. This is super common to clog up, and the customer didn't want any issues with the cooler. Water pump, this has an electric water pump, also common to go. And although this water pump was replaced, I have my doubts. We're just gonna put a new water pump and not risk it. And also the intake manifold. It has a lot of carbon buildup inside of it. All the ports are clogged, so we're gonna replace that. The customer actually got their own EGR valve. While we're here, we're just gonna replace all that so we wouldn't have issues. And once we get the car running, we're gonna update the software for the EGR problems, and that should do it. So for now, we're gonna reassemble the engine. We'll put you guys back on the time lapse. We'll put the new short block. We'll start assembling the engine, put it back in the car, and we'll catch you guys back when we're ready to start it for the first time.
For owners of this engine, let's talk about the why, because that is the most important thing. Why is this engine notorious for head gaskets? Why is this engine burning oil? Why does this engine has EGR problems? Let's talk about this. I will pause the video here to show you the reason. Do you see the original head gasket? Do you see that black material around where the cylinders are? Do you see how it's a small strip? And here's the new one, the updated one. Do you see how it's all black? Folks, that black material is a coating. And from experience, this coating really does not get along well with coolant. Basically, every single head gasket leak from a Toyota I have seen is because of that material. And it's not because the material is faulty or defective. It does not get well with coolant that is acidic. It really just eats it up, and it creates these channels underneath. It starts to lift it up, and it just leaks. It creates the easiest path to somewhere else, and it starts leaking. And that's the change they did in this engine. That's the only change they did, and that resolved the issue. However, you push this engine enough with lack of maintenance, it will leak again. It's just at a lesser rate. And speaking of maintenance, I see this all the time. People these days love cars that don't need maintenance. Oh, let's go long life this. This maintenance doesn't need to be done till 150,000 miles, 100,000 miles. And everybody's going in that direction. There was a time where coolant was replaced every 30,000 miles. We never had issues like that. That's the truth. Now, coolant 100,000, 150,000. It's not just Toyota. Everybody is trying to tell people when they buy the car, oh, this is a low maintenance car. Yet, I don't think anybody cares about that, honestly. People want their cars to last. They don't mind the maintenance. But again, I see so many people neglect their car for 10 years, just oil changes barely, and tires and brakes, just let's keep it going. And then 10 years later, they remember that if you're guilty about it, wait, we must do the maintenance, and they do everything. It's too late. Do the maintenance on time. And in some cases, when it comes to coolant for Toyota, the pink coolant, super long life, change it every 50,000 if you want to play it safe. Keeping this car long, you want to go for that 200,000-300,000 miles without big issues, change it at 50,000. It's as simple as that. Same thing with the transmission. Same thing with all these inflated maintenance intervals. Then the EGR problem. The EGR problem is an interesting one because it has to do with the way the programming of the EGR is, and that's why the software update fixed it. EGR problem starts with blow-by. Every engine will have some blow-by. That's why you have a PCV system. That's why it has an oil separator. So these gases, oil gases, they get routed back to the intake. And the problem actually starts with the intake itself. Those gases, because this is a hybrid, not a regular gasoline car, the engine shuts off, cools down a little bit, just a little bit, and then warms up again. That cooling time changes that vapor that is now stagnant sitting there into oil. Now the oil is pooling more in the intake. And these engines, because the way they start, they don't start at 200 RPM, they immediately start at idle speed. They pull oil from the crankcase. They love to do that. All hybrids do that. So you end up with an excessive amount of oil into the intake, which starts clogging up the ports for the EGR, which then creates a lower flow from the EGR. And now basically gas starts backing up, and it's also stagnant. Some of that gas will have some gas in it, some gasoline. Some of that gas will have some oil in it, and then the buildup starts. So what they did to really update this problem, they changed the duration of how much the EGR valve opens and how much it opens. So now it opens more to let more air through and hopefully push through and clean things up. And it actually worked. That's the software update. That's why replacing your EGR valve without updating the software, give it 100,000 miles, you'll be right back where you started. That's how it is. So the last problem that really adds more gasoline to this fire is this engine loves to burn oil. And the reason it does, low tension rings. They seize up from the 10,000 mile oil change. We've talked about this. We're not even going to go into that debate. But the long intervals of oil change and people not following them properly ends up adding so much gunk to the oil control ring that it starts seizing up, chews up the cylinder wall, and we're burning oil. And burning oil means excessive blow-by, which really accelerates things. Folks, this is a story that I've seen over and over and over. And this is why the third generation Prius, and actually it's not just the third generation Prius and the CT, the Prius V is the same thing, which is a really good car, except this problem. Right around 2014, they actually changed these problems. By 15, both of these problems were fixed. The EGR was updated from the factory. The head gasket was a new style where it's all coated. And then, most importantly, the piston and ring design was changed to kind of remedy all these issues. A little late, should have changed it by year 1, year 2, because this problem has been around for a long time. They didn't. God bless them. At least they came up with something to fix it. But that's what happens with these cars. Now, let's talk about how this small head gasket job turned into a $6,500 job. And some people's hearts just skipped a beat from that number, but let me walk you through that number, because this is not a simple job as you are seeing here, and some of these parts are extremely expensive. Labor is around 20 hours. Short block is almost $2,300. Brand new short block from Toyota. The gasket kit, surprisingly, the cheapest gasket kit of all Toyota models, $271. We did replace the intake manifold. Folks, you can't clean the intake manifold on these. Replace it. But when it's gunged up, replace it, because you're going to have repeating problems. Intake manifold was around $316. EGR cooler, which is something that the customer requested. I don't want to have any issues with this. Let's put a new cooler and be done. Could have been cleaned, but we went with a new cooler, $442. Oil, I usually do double oil changes when we do the engine, so right around 9 quarts. That's right around $82. Coolant, $55. Cup double filters, that's right around $12. Some cleaner, sealer, and then the water pump. Water pump was $323. And then the 12-volt battery at $174. And that is your $6,500, folks. And I want to share with you something very important. Was this worth it? Honestly, in the end, each case is different. Some folks will say it was absolutely worth it. Some folks will say, I want to spend $200 on this car. But in the end, it has to do with the owner, their situation, what their financial situation is, what their intended use with the car is, what is the current situation in the car market is not helping, but that shouldn't be the only factor. There are cases where I just tell the customer, I don't think this car is worth the oil change you're doing to it. And there are cases where the customer was ready to trade in the car. And basically I told him, I don't think this is ready. You can actually salvage this, but it's your decision, not mine. My job as a mechanic is to inform accurately. This is what we have. These are the facts on the ground. This is what it's going to take to get this car not mended and barely back on the road. No, this is what it's going to take this car to fix it and fix it right and fix it to a point where it becomes dependable again. Because the problem with this particular case, well, when the car first came in, what if I would have just told him, oh yeah, it's head gasket, let's get it done, let's get it out, we're done. And this owner would have spent $1,800 on a head gasket job, and the engine still burns oil, and then the EGR is still the same way. And then after a few months, he just spent $1,800. The engine oil burning progresses so rapidly, so badly, that now we're back to square one. Oh wait, we're gonna now we're gonna spend the $6,500 to tear this engine apart and replace a short block and take that same head gasket that we just replaced a few months ago, throw it to the garbage, and get a new one. That is not good business, folks. This is not how car repair should work. This is one of the missions of my shop. It's not about the amount. I don't see it as an amount problem. My thing is, and some customers have heard me say this, and please hear me out here because this is important. If your car needs $6,500 worth of repair, then it needs $6,500 worth of repair. You need to hear it so you can make informed decisions. But if your car does not need $1 worth of repair, then it doesn't need it. I hope that metaphor makes sense, because if you're going to fix your car, when you're talking about big jobs like this, if you're going to fix it, you're either going to fix it well, where it's a dependable car where you can truly depend on it and expect to get another 100, 200,000 miles out of it, or don't bother. There's no magic fix here. You can't just fix a leak and add some Marvel, mystery, whoever, oil, magic fix. There's no magic fix here. That's the God honest truth, folks. If you're going to fix your car, fix it right, or don't fix it and move on to something else. That's the conversation I have with customers almost every day about situations like this, sometimes bigger, especially when rust is involved. That's really is when I draw the line. I'm like, some people have accused me only pick and choose what you work on. I don't pick and choose what I work on. If the car that I have in the shop is not a car I feel safe putting my own children in, then I will not touch it. And I will kind of make a case to the customer. This car is not worth it. All you're going to get out of this is problem after problem leading up to you spending a lot of money and you're getting back to square one more than one time, and that's not good. Folks, making decisions on cars with big jobs is a tough one, and I'm with you. I see people's faces and kind of the moment of decision. But the biggest thing is you got to get the full picture. I can't tell this customer, let's put a head gasket, and I know there's more problems with this car, and I just decide to omit them because some mechanics are afraid to tell the customer these big bills. Some mechanics they just want to get the job and be done. They think they will not buy it. No, everybody's situation is different. You give them the full picture, you let them decide. And sometimes they will have follow-up questions. Well, how do I decide? And here is the last of that. Research. What is your car worth as it sits? And what can you buy? Are you ready for car payments? There's nothing wrong with car payments, but not everybody's ready for them. Some people don't want car payments, and that's perfectly fine. But your decision needs to be an informed one that has all the facts sitting in front of you before you make that decision. And with that, this engine is ready to start. Let's go back to the live video.
All right, folks, we filled all the fluids. We did prime it already because hybrids are extremely tedious to prime. You basically have to unplug the crank sensor, put it in maintenance mode, basically start it, let the engine run. It'll just spin the engine for a little, like a 2-3 seconds. You have to repeat that multiple times. So in order to keep this video not too long, it's already too long, let's start it. It is already primed, it is already ready, everything is plugged in. Let's go ahead and start it. That's pretty good. That rattle that you heard was actually the transmission, because the engine's been kinda forgot that we're starting it for the first time. I kept talking. Let me just look around. Sounds pretty healthy. I'll talk to you about might have some smoke. Actually, it ran a lot smoother than I anticipated. Yeah, here comes the smoke. So here's what that rattle was. That is the planetary gear set inside the transmission. This is how hybrid ECVTs are. So when the engine is not smooth, and this is a new engine, we had oil inside, we have cleaner all over the place, so it's not gonna run smooth the first start. So that rattle you heard was that. It's plain and simple. It's running pretty healthy. Sounds really good. Usually when you start newer engines, they'll shake a lot more, but this one sounds pretty good. It's idling up. You're gonna let it let it run its cycle. We already bled the coolant. So what I did here, before we even started, because the water pump is electric, you can turn it on, have it cycle the coolant everywhere. Same thing with the inverter coolant, that you have to do it that way to bleed it, or there's another way, but we really emptied the system out because we took the inverter out. But I'm really happy with this job, turned out great. We were a little bit nervous about that cylinder head as we talked about, but that checked out good. We have a lot left on this car. We still have to clean it up, put everything back, drive it a little bit, but before we drive it, I'm gonna dump the oil again in the filter because we do have some remnants of that coolant, and I don't want it going thousands of miles with some coolant inside the oil. That's actually not healthy for the new engine. So we're gonna let it run here for a bit, then we'll drain the oil again, change the filter. Just whatever remnants of that coolant, we want to try to get it out as much as possible. It'll never be 100%, but you don't want large puddles. So folks, this CT200, I hope, is ready for another 229,000 miles with the updated pistons, with the updated head gasket. Shouldn't have the issue. So basically, this is now a later model or later revision of this engine, so the owner wouldn't have issues driving Uber and enjoying his time. Folks, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.